Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a different type of review video. Normally I go over standalone projects or kids horror anthology series like Goosebumps or Spine Tinglers, or maybe some standalone movies like, I don't know, The Scream Team or Crybaby Lane, stuff that feels like Goosebumps. But today I want to talk about a franchise from the kids horror genre that I grew up with and had an affinity for as a kid. And now it's not quite the same vibe. This is obviously being targeted to a younger audience than Goosebumps. This is being targeted to like 4 to 8 year olds. It's not anthology horror. It's actually based on a Harvey comic property, but I thought, why not? I want to make this channel more of a kids horror hub and, just a spooky type of channel anyway, and talk about a lot of things, that could be considered kids horror. So I decided to pick the second movie of this I guess franchise to talk about, and the movie today we're going to be discussing is Casper, A Spirited Beginning. Now, what caused this movie and the movies after it to exist, like Casper Meets Wendy, is essentially the 1995 film with Christina Ricci that a lot of people know of, the Universal film, had gotten widestream attention, mainstream success. It was nominated for Academy Awards. It brought in the new age of Casper. It kind of reset Casper. What came with it was a subsidiary cartoon show that aired on Fox Kids Network, which started this relationship with Universal and 20th Century Fox for this property. And essentially what came out of that was 20th Century Fox was given the rights to make straight-to-TV, straight-to-video prequel movies, not sequels, but prequel movies to the 1995 film. And Universal was going to use these prequel movies to be the basis if they were going to make a sequel follow-up, because they were going to be in charge of the theatrical sequels to the 1995 film. And they were going to use these prequel movies to kind of gauge whether they were going to make the sequel happen. And now they did make Casper's Haunted Christmas, which was an animated movie from 2000, but that's as far as Universal really ever went with the franchise. And essentially it could be summed down to that this movie and Casper Meets Wendy killed the franchise. And this movie is one of the most hated movies of all time. According to Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, do I agree with that rating? I will get to that near the end of the video. But I have a little bit of nostalgia sentiment for this movie, because I grew up watching this in Casper Meets Wendy in the 1995 film, and I wanted to reacquaint myself with the movie, so I rewatched it recently, and I have a lot to unpack about this movie. But yeah, this movie, it has a really decent cast going for it. You have Steve Guttenberg, who you might know from 90s staple movies like It Takes Two with Kirstie Alley, with the Olsen twins. He was in Zeus and Roxanne, that HBO movie about the dog and the dolphin becoming friends. And he was also in the Wonderful World of Disney movie Tower of Terror, which is based on the ride Tower of Terror at the Disney World. So he was kind of a staple father character, and he's the father in this movie. He plays Mr. Carson. And Lori Loughlin, who played Aunt Becky in Full House, is playing Chris Carson right here, the main character. She's playing his teacher, Sheila Fistagraph. Then you have people like the likes of James Earl Jones voicing the main villain, Kibosh, who also went on to become a villain in like Casper Scare School, the cartoon. And you have Pauly Shore, whether you like him or not, voicing Snivel. You have Michael McKean from the Spinal Tap movie, and he also was in that Brady Bunch movie from the early 90s as the neighbor. He plays this demolitions expert guy. And there's a couple of cameos from Casper Van Dien. He was in that Starship Troopers movie. You have Sherman Hemsley, who played George Jefferson from the Jeffersons. You have Ben Stein, who was also featured in the first movie. So this movie has a lot going for it, at least for the cast, for a straight TV movie. Even has Rodney Dangerfield playing the mayor in this. So it has a couple of fun, appearances in here. You have a debut acting performance from the actor Brendan Ryan Barrett, who actually went on to voice Casper in Casper's Haunted Christmas. So this is like his claim to fame franchise, I'm supposing. and it has a lot going for it on the cast department, but unfortunately, the cast doesn't deliver, the plot doesn't deliver, because this movie's produced and written by people working for Saban Entertainment. So when 20th Century Fox got the rights to make these prequel movies, they used the creators of Power Rangers and Big Bad Beetleborgs to make this movie, and it clearly shows. And it kind of is like a little bit of a subtle billboard for the Big Bad Beetleborg show, which was new at the time. And on top of that, they got the director who, you might know who, this person's been attached to the Even Stevens and Phil of the Future shows on Disney Channel. He directed the Bratz movie. He directed the Even Stevens movie. He directed the movie after this, Casper Meets Wendy, who you're probably more familiar with as a kid if you grew up watching Disney Channel, or the 31 Nights of Halloween on ABC Family. Sean McNamara is the person who directed this film. He has a lot of stuff attached to his name. Most infamously, though, one of the most hated movies of all time, Three Ninjas, High Noon, and Mega Mountain. He's a director of that movie too. So, right off the success, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, of Three Ninjas, High Noon, and Mega Mountain, he went and made this. 1997 is probably the worst year for kids' movies in general. This movie came out in 1997. It kind of fits that this movie came out in that year. And yeah, before we go any further into the plot, all I have to say is, if I had one thing to say about this movie, from it being slated as a prequel movie, it fails on every regard. From the acting performances to the CGI, which is one of the worst CGI I've seen in a big name project ever, down to how cliche this plot is, down to how forced some of the stuff with Casper is, and how some of these jokes and some of these characters are just bad and just awful. This movie is painfully mediocre, painfully abysmal, and just outright bad. This is a bad movie. Do I recommend you watch this movie? No. Go watch the 1995 film before we go any further. But if you're curious, or maybe have some nostalgia to this movie, stick around. But off the bat, I do not recommend this movie. It's bad. So, I'll save what I really want to unpack near the end of the video. But let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, this movie is set up to be a prequel to the 1995 film, where Casper already had an origin established in that movie and everything. You already had I think it's called the Winthrop or Wingate or whatever it's called mansion. I know it starts with a W. And you had those characters from the first movie played by Christina Ricci and Bill Pullman. Here, in Spirit of Beginning, to call this a prequel to the 1995 film, which I think Universal still stands by till this day, is insulting. Okay? This is an insulting way to angle a prequel. But anyway, we're going to go with this because this is what Universal says is the prequel to the 1995 film. So, the movie starts off with really crappy CGI, and Casper is on this ghost train in the Spirit Dimension, as coined by the video game Casper Spirit Dimensions. And while he's on this train, he's wondering where he is. He's kind of lost, kind of scared at the same time. So he goes around and asks some ghostly figures on this train. He's kind of wondering if he's in a dream or whatnot, but these ghosts are being mean to him. And he stumbles across this one ghost who grabs him by the throat and literally throws him out of this train. And he goes stumbling into the train, by the train tracks, and he gets up and he starts looking around, kind of amazed by the world he's in. But then he ends up back in the real world without really any real transition. And he ends up in this town called Deedstown. Now, Deedstown is kind of like this, you know, slice of life, suburbia, small town, where everyone knows each other. It seems close-knit. It seems historical. You get that vibe off the bat just by the way it looks and the aesthetics of it. And while Casper's wandering, he's trying to get help from people, but people are running away from him, saying, ghosts and stuff. And, you know, typical Casper cheese. I kind of blame Sean McNamara for how he depicts this. But, yeah, people... You can clearly tell that these extras and actors who are supposed to be talking to Casper or looking at Casper are looking into thin air. You know, most of the time with CGI movies and, like, mixture movies of live action and animation, they have a person with motion capture there to kind of give somebody real to talk to. But in this movie, you can clearly tell there was no budget, there was no motion capture person. they're talking to thin air. So some of these scenes can be kind of cringe, but of course Casper scares the town folks, and he's kind of upset, like he doesn't know why nobody wants to be around him. Then he kind of puts two and together that he's a ghost. So after he realizes this, it cuts to this father and this kid at this house, in presumably in Deedstown, and you meet this kid named Chris Carson. Now Chris is just an ordinary kid. You look around his room, he has X-Files everywhere. He has ghost posters. You can tell that he's into the supernatural. And right there, I can kind of plug myself into Chris's character, because as a kid, I was obsessed with Goosebumps. I was obsessed with, you know, scary stuff. So every time I watch this, I get a kick out of Chris. And Chris, you know, his actor is not too bad. It's just his debut performance. He does okay for a kid actor here. But we get a sense of Chris and his father, and his father's relationship. And his father is played by Steve Guttenberg, who's right here. And Steve Guttenberg is kind of a workaholic. There's no mom around. The mom died. That's kind of sad, but he's always up and at 'em right early, 6:30 in the morning. And he's revealed that he has to go to the Applegate Mansion because this is going to be a big day for him and for the family. Because once the Applegate Mansion goes down, they're going to build a big mall, and the town's going to really love it. And Chris is kind of bummed out because he likes the Applegate place. It's really historic, as we'll learn throughout the movie. But the father has to go, and then Chris kind of sits there with his father not eating the breakfast he prepared for his dad. And yeah, Chris tries to be the kid and the mom / the wife to his dad. And his dad, you can kind of get a sense that his dad's a workaholic and just a jerk to Chris. And Chris gets ready and, you know, heads off to school. So at this point, there's two things going on right at this point of the movie. So Chris's father ends up at the Applegate Mansion, and it's the day to kind of set everything up, get the construction crew ready to demolish the Applegate Mansion. And then Chris heads off to school, and where he encounters these bullies led by this kid named Brock. And Brock is easily one of the biggest jerks I've ever seen in kids' horror. And he's in a Casper movie. And what he does in this movie is just horrendous. Even for kids' horror bully standards, he is bad. So Brock is making fun of Chris with his like, you know, group of 4 friends. And Chris kind of has a snarky, you know, attitude towards him and sticks up to him. And he, of course, gets Brock to, you know, kind of follow him to school. And there's this whole revelation that there's this prank being set up at the school where the kids were going to follow, you know, get Chris to head to school. And they were going to prank him by dumping this big bucket of stuff onto him. But then when they arrive at school, Brock and his friend end up getting slimed or dumped on with the principal. The principal comes out and tries to break up what was going on, and of course the boys get punished. And Chris is, of course, avoided punishment, and he's taken into school. Now maybe he is taken into the principal's office to get punished, and that's where he meets his teacher, Sheila Fistagraph, who is Lori Loughlin's character. And you kind of, she was there earlier trying to protest before I guess she went to work, and you saw this interaction with Chris's father and her and Rodney Dangerfield, the mayor, and she's standing up to the demolition of the Applegate Mansion, and she will not stop until it's saved. Well, there's a news broadcast going on where Chris and Sheila see that Chris's father is being interviewed about the new shopping mall that's going to go in the place of the Applegate Mansion. And she's like, "You haven't heard the last of me. I'm not done with you yet." Then it cuts back to the mansion where everything's supposed to be underway. They're going to start demolition that day. Now, whether they level the whole house in one day, I don't know. But it's about to be underway. And the protesters are on look in amazement. Kind of disappointing as well. But low-key, it is saved by the antics of presumed ghosts. Now, these ghosts we come to know from the first movie. We have Stretch, Stinky, and Fatso, who come out and pretty much scare the construction workers away and punish them for trying to demolish the house that they reside in and haunt. So when this happens, this scares off everyone. And while Chris is, you know, leaving school, he notices that people are running away, and so does Casper. So Casper tries to figure out what's going on, and then Chris and Casper end up meeting for the first time. So when that happens, Chris and Casper, they're talking, and he's like, "Oh, you're a real ghost," and he goes, "You know, I'm a brand new ghost. I don't know how to be a ghost." And Chris is like, "Well, I know where there's ghosts. Let's go." And he takes him to the Applegate Mansion. So obviously Chris already knew about the ghosts inside of the Applegate Mansion, and he takes him there, and that's where Casper for the first time meets Fatso, Stinky, and Stretch. And these kids are like, and the ghosts are like, "Oh, you know, Casper, you're just a kid." And there's a scene that shows Casper phasing through a wall, going into this house for the first time, and then the ghostly trio offers to teach Casper how to be a ghost, and they give him like kind of like a test, like turn invisible, phase through a wall, and Casper can't phase through a wall, but he just did it. You know, it's very forced in some areas in this movie with Casper, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So Chris thinks that he's all right, he's in good hands with the ghostly trio, and the ghostly trio agree to kind of watch over Casper and teach him everything they know, and hope that Casper catches on. So Chris is like, "Okay, I got to get going." So while this happens, Snivel, who we finally meet, Snivel is doing a head count of the ghosts from the early on in the beginning of the movie. He's doing a head count and realizes there's a ghost missing, and realizes the ghost named Casper is missing. So he goes to his boss at this like boot camp ghost academy thing, and Kai Bosch is supposed to be like this green Slimer from Ghostbusters looking general. So Kai Bosch is this, and then that's Snivel. And Kai Bosch is like making like one-liners like, "Where's Carter? Where's Chrysler?" You know, makes stuff like, jokes like that about Casper's name. He can never get Casper's name right till like the end of the movie. But he's like, "You got to go find this missing ghost. This is bad." And he sends Snivel to go find him. Well, Snivel gets reconnaissance from what he uncovers in Deedstown when he arrives there. It'll come in handy in a bit. So then we learn, remember back at the beginning of the movie where I said that Chris kind of feels left out by his father. His father is a workaholic. We see his father at the office stressing about the construction crew abandoning the project, and now he has to find somebody else to demolish it, and he needs it demolished by a certain time so he can get his mall project underway. And he's so wrapped up in his work that he misses this parent-teacher conference that happens after school, where Chris has done a project on ghosts and all of that, and he's disappointed. And you kind of see the girl from Brock's bully group kind of befriend him a little bit. You kind of see signs of that. And Sheila's like, "Well, why don't we try to reschedule?" And Chris is like, "Okay." So later on, Chris tells his dad that they need to reschedule the appointment, and Chris's dad's like, "Okay, let's do that. And then after the conference, we'll have a guys' night, we'll have dinner, and we'll go to the batting cage." And Chris is all hype about that, and he gets really excited. Meanwhile, Casper has been kicked out from the ghostly trio because he can't be scary, and they think he's not worth being a part of the ghostly trio. So Casper gets kicked out, and Casper kind of goes on his solo journey where he has to figure out how to be a ghost. So Chris, being, you know, he feels a lot better. He's feeling jazzed up the next day. He offers to help Casper learn how to be a ghost. So he takes him to his school and essentially tries to teach Casper the ropes through this little supernatural book he has. And he tries to get Casper to phase through the wall again for some reason. And there's a funny scene where he phases through a bunch of bathroom stalls. He ends up in the principal stall, who's played by Richard Mull, by the way. I don't know if I brought that up, but he's famous from Night Court. He played the ghost in Scary Movie 2 in The House. And he also played one of the henchman characters of Desmond Spellman in Casper Meets Wendy. But he scares the principal, and he runs off and gets like knocked out temporarily by this teacher because he makes a sexual harassment joke. I wish I was making that up, but that's what happens. He's like, "I need you," and the teacher's like screaming because he's in his underwear and slaps him. So Casper and his friend, Casper and Chris high-five, and they head to the library. And he's like, "This is going to be where we're going to practice a lot. You can turn invisible, and now you need to practice picking up stuff." And he tries picking up books, but knocks them all down. And while Chris is putting away the books, he has the encounter with Brock. And Brock's upset that he got a bunch of detentions for that prank that happened at school, but it was all his fault. And Chris didn't get in any trouble, so now Chris is going to have to pay. So Casper gets this idea to take this globe and smash it over Brock's head, and chaos ensues as Snivel is watching Casper, and Snivel is starting to get this impression that the ghostly trio taught Casper to disobey the rules, and now Casper is going to have to be taken to back to scare school for extra punishment. And what happens is Brock gets in even more trouble by the principal because there's a fire extinguisher that goes off, and yeah, there's a bunch of wild, hectic stuff. So once Brock gets in trouble and taken away by the principal, Chris and Casper are both in a great mood. They head back to Chris's house. Well, Casper heads off, and they agree to meet up later for dinner because Chris invites him over because they're having dinner that night, and Chris is going to make dinner for his father and go to the batting cage, and he wants his dad to meet Casper. And Casper is all jazzed up. He goes out and starts trying to be a hero. He sees this robber guy trying to rob this convenience store, and the convenience store owner is Sherman Helmsley, who's George Jefferson, and helps him, and Casper thinks he's going to become this hero. And he's all jazzed up and can't wait to see Chris. Well, Chris stayed after school for the makeup parent-teacher conference, and the father is actually planning on going there and being on time. He's planning on being a good dad. But when his assistant tells him that Sheila Fistagraph is the woman leading the charge on the protest, he gets upset and calls her at school and says he's not showing up, and they get in kind of a war of words, and Chris starts crying and storms out, and, you know, teacher just can't help but look, you know, worrisome as he leaves. But he left behind a binder, and when Chris gets home, he's upset, but Casper's like, hey, I've had a great day, and Chris is like, my dad's too busy for work, he doesn't care about me, he missed my conference, he knew how important that was to me. And Casper's like, well, let's try to make the most of it. So they hear a doorbell ring, and they think it might be Chris's father, but it's actually Sheila who brought the binder over. And there's this really cliche scene with Casper trying to hide in plain sight that we've seen since, like, the movie E.T. And Chris has to, like, try to hide Casper while she's over. And Sheila kind of reveals that she just really wants to talk to her dad, to his Chris's father, about the Applegate Mansion and try to break through to him a little bit. And then she leaves because it gets kind of awkward. So when she leaves, Chris and Casper is like, okay, let's try to salvage the night. Let's try to make dinner, and, you know, we're going to have a really nice dinner, and then we're going to go to the batting cage and salvage the night. So there goes through, like, a really cliche montage of food making. Of course, Chris demolishes the kitchen, but he makes the dining table look really nice, and it's all nice and presentable for when his father comes home. So he sets up Casper outside of his window to have this big reveal to be that Casper is going to be there when it's time for when Chris's dad comes to his room. Casper is going to surprise Chris's dad and kind of reveal that he's a ghost that way. But before this went on, the ghostly trio got this idea that something is off about Casper, and Casper is getting them in trouble with Kibosh, and it's best that they capture him and do something with him now before he ruins their gig they have. So they go off and try to capture Casper. And when this happens, Casper's taken away, and Chris's dad comes home, and Chris's dad, of course, tries to console Chris for missing the parent-teacher conference, and then says that he has a call from the mayor. The mayor says he has to go to work after dinner. And Chris is like, but you promised you'd take me to the batting cage. And he's like, Chris, I can't do this right now. And Chris is like, well, at least meet my friend. And he goes up to try to show his father Casper, and Casper's not there. And this sets Chris's father off, and he starts taking stuff out of his room and throwing it away, and storms out with his briefcase and heads back to work. And Chris is all upset, and he says, Casper, how could you do this to me? And he leaves a note and runs away and packs all of his stuff. Well, meanwhile, Casper's back at the mansion and being tormented by the ghostly trio, and he has to try to escape and find his way back to Chris But he can't find Chris when he goes back to Chris's house because Chris had run away. And it's revealed that while Chris is walking and sees his dad coming, it's a really sad scene where Chris looks another boy and his father coming home from the batting cage, and he kind of reflects like, I wish that was me. But this boy named Brock and his toadies come and pretty much beat up Chris and take him to the Applegate mansion. I forgot to mention this, but it's pretty much confirmed at a certain point where going back to where the construction crew abandoned the project because they got scared off, Chris's father had hired this one-man demolition person named Michael McKean, played by Michael McKean, and hired him, and the guy almost sets his office on fire, but he's agreed to put a bomb into the house and blow it up because that's what he's known for. He's an explosives expert, supposedly. And there's a bomb put in the Applegate mansion by the demolitions guy while the ghostly trio was out trying to hunt for Casper, and now there's a bomb in there. And it's pretty much confirmed that regardless, the Applegate mansion is going to be coming down and being destroyed tomorrow. Somehow that became public news. I guess via the mayor, who's played by Rodney Dangerfield. So these boys take Chris, take him to the Applegate mansion, and lock him in this closet, lock it with a key, and throw the key out the window. Literally trying to kill him in this house with a bomb. I'm not making this up. So, yeah, that's there. And Chris is left in the closet overnight, and he's like all sad and alone. He's run away. He's now locked in the house. It's pretty much doomed, but he doesn't know that, but I think the other kids do. So the next morning comes, and Chris's dad had come back from work and fallen asleep on the couch, and he goes up to try to wake up Chris. Chris isn't there, and then Casper tries to, find Chris again. And that's when he finally meets Chris's father, Mr. Carson. And Mr. Carson takes a baseball bat and swings. And he realizes that Chris had run away and that Casper might have put him up to it. And Casper just kind of coaches him and says, hey, look, you're never there for him. And he feels distant from you. And, like, you should try to do better. And then, like, Steve Guttenberg, just his acting just goes from kind of decent to bad. When he's like, you're right, Casper. Yeah. I do love him. I need to be there for him more. It's so cheesy. Steve Guttenberg, what? What the heck, man? So, when Casper reveals the bombshell that he found Chris at the Applegate mansion and he's stuck in there and he can't get the door open, Chris's father freaks out. He's like, that place is going to blow up. So he gets in the car, gets his keys, leaves the house, and sees Sheila driving her Volkswagen Bug with all of her protest signs, and she picks them up, and they head to the Applegate mansion, and crazy driving ensues with Sheila, and they end up at the Applegate mansion, where all these protesters are outside, and there's news people, and the mayor's there, and the demolitions guy's hiding up in a tree. They can't make contact with him because his phone fell and broke on a rock, plot convenience. So he has the detonator, and he has it ready, primed, ready to go, and he has it on his timer to push the button at the exact time. Well, they're trying to plead with the guy to not push the button, but he won't listen because I think he's meant to be like a military role player or something. So Sheila takes her bug and drives it into a tree, which knocks him out of the tree, and he falls on top of the bug, and they take the detonator and throw it. But he then says that he put a failsafe on it just in case people try to meddle with him, and it's going to blow up within a minute. So Chris's father goes into the mansion to try to save Chris, and he manages to do so, and they get Chris out of the house. But now the bomb's still going to go off and destroy the house. So Casper gets this idea to essentially eat the bomb, and that's the only thing to do. But another thing that was going on is that Kibosh came to Deedstown and captured the ghostly trio for teaching Casper to do bad things, and they're going to have to go back to scare school too. So he puts them in a cage and carries them off to the Applegate mansion, and this is where Kibosh and Casper converge for the first time. So Kibosh is holding the ghostly trio in the cage, and is holding Casper as his bomb's about to detonate. He's holding him by the throat, and Casper just starts imploding. It's like these fart noises and sniffles overwatching, and everybody's just like, ah! So bizarrely done here. But essentially, Casper, like his whole body inflates, and you see his butt cheeks flying out one of the windows, and the bomb has been successfully, you know, terminated because Casper ate it. And this makes everyone outside cheer. Everyone's happy that the mansion's still standing. And Kibosh is impressed. And somehow the ghostly trio got freed from the cage when Kibosh dropped it when Casper was exploding. And it's basically said by Kibosh, who finally gets Casper's name right, that Casper and the ghostly trio are going to have to live together for eternity, and the ghostly trio is going to be responsible for Casper. And the ghostly trio feels thankful because of what he did and freeing them from the cage that Kibosh would have taken him back in. So that's how that happened. That's how Casper and the ghostly trio became a family. That's the answer that they want us to believe from the first movie. And then Kibosh heads off. And, of course, there's some loose ends kind of wrapped up with the bullies. Do the bullies get punished by the ghostly trio? That's up for debate. Do, you know, Sheila and the father get together with Chris and try to come up with something new for the house? You got to watch it to figure it out. But essentially, it gets a corny ending, and we discover that this whole movie is about how Casper got his name, Casper the Friendly Ghost. And that essentially is Casper, A Spirited Beginning. Sorry, this video is going to be longer than usual because I had a lot to unpack. But, yeah, this movie kind of sucked. This movie is so cheesy and bland and basic that I can't really praise any of it. There's very few things to praise about this movie, and I'm going to get them off my chest because there are some things holding this back from being just completely terrible for me. Or at least a bit too terrible. So, one thing I really enjoyed about this movie was Chris. Chris's character, I'm able to identify with Chris. He has some really solid moments in the story. And he's surrounded by completely horrendous, deplorable people. And this people of Deedstown, minus the protesters, even Sheila Fistograph to an extent, they're all just ridiculous people. Sheila's more nice. I can be more forgiving with her character, played by Lori Loughlin. But, like, the demolitions guy, Chris's father, even the mayor, all these people are idiots, and they're awful people. Not even mentioning Brock. Brock is terrible. He's one of the worst kids ever. He put him in a house to try to kill him with the house, knowing that it's going to blow up. How awful is that? So Chris's situation is definitely sympathetic, and you understand that he lives in a world where, or at least in a bubble where people are just terrible to him. So Chris is definitely sympathetic. At the heart of this movie, it still feels like a Casper movie. You know, if you don't like the answers, if you don't like that it's a bad prequel to set everything up, that's fine. But at least it still fits with that Casper vibe. And I really get some enjoyment out of it. There are some scenes that genuinely make me laugh. And I will give it that. It does. There are some scenes that genuinely are funny. Like the explosion scene at the end, that's ridiculous. The underwear principal scene, that was kind of funny. But yeah, that's probably where I'll end my compliments. And now we're going to get into the roasting here. This is going to get a roast, essentially. For this movie, being slated as a prequel, the prequel to the 1995 film, is intelligence insulting. I can only imagine, because I was about 4 or 5 when this movie came out, at least the first time I watched it, and this movie was definitely targeted to 4 to 8-year-olds, not trying to honor any of their intelligence, or any intelligence of any person 9 years or older, for that matter. And I can only imagine how those older kids felt watching this, being told and advertised, and pretty much having all this additional stuff, like promotional stuff. Like, I think this movie had, like, kids' meal toys at certain fast food places, and this thing had, like, a promotional lunchbox you could mail away, like, in Count Chocula cereal. All these kids were hyped for this movie, promised that it's a true prequel to the first movie. And the first movie clearly says that Casper died in the early 1900s and stayed behind because his father needed him. At least that's what Casper thought. And that's why he stayed at the mansion. Well, in this movie, you don't know anything about him. He just ends up in the spirit dimension. He escapes a train and ends up in this town called Deedstown, where he meets the ghostly trio, and that's how they team up. and become a family, and that's how he learns to be a ghost. So everything's implied that he's a brand new, fresh ghost in 1997. So him dying in the early 1900s goes against his origin established in the first movie, and it just fails on making anything coherent or anything tangible to tie to the first movie in any way. And maybe that's the budget, maybe that's the Saban's production team go flat out just trying to refuse that and just making something totally different and essentially a rehash. It being called a prequel is absolutely egregious, and it fails on every method of being a prequel movie. So that's a definite reason why people hate this off the bat. But even going past that, the CGI in this movie, I know it's the 90s, but man, the CGI looks so bad. There's a scene in this movie where there's an entire panel. When we first meet Kibosh, it's a completely blacked out panel. There's nothing there. It's that depressing. On top of that, near the middle part of the movie, there's a whole sequence of scenes where Stinky is lagging because he didn't render properly, and he looks like he's having a seizure on screen. It looks terrible. It just looks very cheap, very Disney mockbuster animation type of quality, and it's just really bad. And that stems down to the character performances as well. Most of the actors, I think Lori Loughlin and the kid actor Brendan Brian Barrett, and maybe the voice of Casper, did the best job here. Rodney Dangerfield is okay. He's like the same type in every movie he's in. But Michael McKean's over-the-top acting of this Demolitions guy, Steve Guttenberg's bad acting as the father in this movie, and just some really cringy characters, and they're kind of stemming into some horrible characters like the Demolitions guy, the bully named Brock, and Chris's father. They're all awful, and you completely despise them. And I don't get it. Why they're so awful. But they're some of the worst parents, bullies, and kind of villains I've ever seen in kids' horror, all in one. It makes this movie just hard to stomach because of that. Bad acting and then bad characters on top of it. And I haven't mentioned my copy here, but this DVD copy, I purchased at a Five Below years ago. And maybe that's a testament to the legacy of this movie and how many people value this movie and what it offers. In totality, this movie just we're getting into another negative. This movie inserts so many annoying and bland cliches. It's just so mind-numbingly boring in some areas, and so bland and so non-creative that Casper Meets Wendy, I think, is a way better movie in comparison to this. It's just a bad movie all around. I mean, it's just bad. It's just nothing really tangible to save this movie from being a bad movie. So obviously, if you're familiar with my channel and my grading system, I know this is a really long video, but from a 0 to 5 star basis, I knew this thing was getting less than a 3. Now, I kind of just wavered if I wanted to give it a bad or a terrible, and a dividing point would be 2.5, and I think it's right on that cusp of being a bad movie and being a terrible movie. So, and plus, since it's made for kids, and especially younger kids, I do give a 1-star curve. Nothing gets below a 1 star here, and I do give a 1-star curve off the bat to what I normally would give it. Without the curve, I would probably give this a 1.5 out of 5 on just a normal movie experience. But since it's for kids, I will go ahead and round it up to a 2.5 out of 5 with all those problems and annoyances this movie has. And I would say this movie is just the lowest of bad it can possibly be before it gets to terrible. A 2.5 out of 5, I think I'm being really fair on this movie. I can't really praise anything about it. Now, if you're a Casper fan, you can easily skip this movie, but it does introduce Kibosh, and if you're a fan of the Scare School series, you might want to watch this to kind of see how that came about. And other than that, just a big stinker. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Casper: A Spirited Beginning. Let me know down in the comment section if you have seen this movie. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.